Artificial intelligence entered my life as a journalist, as far as I remember, in 2015, when a whistleblower who called himself or herself John Doe addressed to Süddeutsche Zeitung. In a longer lasting process then, John Doe handed us over 2.6 terabyte of data, an unimaginable amount of information. To make it a bit more understandable, that was 11.5 million documents, about 214,000 shell companies at that time. This was the biggest leak that journalists ever had worked with up to then. As the editor-in-chief of Süddeutsche Zeitung, I was overseeing the investigation and publication of the Panama Papers. An investigation in cooperation with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalism, the ICIG, where Pierre is working now, not then, at that time. A cooperation that was, in the end, awarded with a Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting in 2017. I have to admit, in the beginning, when these 11.5 million documents arrived, I didn't know how to handle. We were helpless and stumped. There were millions of emails, bank accounts, PDF files, passport copies, and many other documents, photos, and we didn't know how we could get a structure into these data, how we could make them searchable, and how we could find any relevant information in these documents. So this was the moment when AI entered my life as a journalist. At that time, we found a software that had been developed by police authorities with a little help of AI. Together with the then computer experts of ICIJ and others, we started the Operation Panama Papers, 400 journalists in over 80 countries, investigating for 12 months, secretly and what is surprising for journalists, and very effectively. And we published together on the 3rd of April 2016 at 8 p.m. in the evening. This was a publication that was enabled with a little help from AI. But many years have gone since then, and we are at a completely other point with AI, and so this is the thing we want to talk about today. We want to hear what can AI enable today in investigative journalism, what progress do we see, and how can it help us in not only in newsrooms but also in investigative journalism. To answer these questions, we have 3 experts on the stage, 3 innovators, and they will present us some ideas and also some showcases. They want to show and also to share some of the amazing ways how they are using technology and AI to tell big stories. So, first of all, we start with Florencia Cuello. She's a research and training manager with La Nación in Buenos Aires in Argentina. So the floor is yours.
Super. May I have my presentation? Okay. Yes. So for those who haven't visited Argentina before, we are there, and besides economic crisis of 100% of inflation annually, we have the best soccer player of the world, and we are champions this year, and the Pope, we still have some curious data. About me, I have been a fellow at JSK Stanford, researching on AI in class 2019. I'm part of La Nación data team. where I want to represent today, because it's a teamwork, of course, not mine. And I also have been privileged to be part of the Journalism AI Collab that Charlie Beckett mentioned early this morning. So I have been able to practice and experiment with AI with journalists from different parts of the world. So nowadays we are, instead of investigating corruption, we are investigating technologies as we were watchdog journalists, and we have been playing with natural language processing for analyzing lyrics of trap music. We've also have turned to Spanish a gender gap tracker that we have learned in the Journalism AI Collab. And recently we are finishing a project, a predictive model to enhance the click-through rate of our headlines in Facebook. And the score for the editors also include diversity and inclusion word suggestion. If they put a word that the community doesn't like to be referred as, it has a suggestion like a password, you should use this other word. So let's go backwards. Like in, I think it was 2008, I was amazed with the crowdsourcing expenses of The Guardian, and I said, oh, we should have this. And then I saw ProPublica's Free the Files. No, it was Free the Files, and I was excited. We should have this. And we were super lucky to have an iMozilla Open News Fellow in our newsroom, and there was 2 different fellows that created an online platform that is called Voz Data to help us open data, no? But manually with people. So we made collaborations with NGOs and universities, and we investigated Senate expenses, and this is not changing, and still in some seconds of my time. Okay. Then we got a huge leak on phone interception, 40,000 audios, and we tried to use speech to text. It was an investigation around a bomb attack on a Jewish association in Argentina, and a couple of years later, the general prosecutor accused our president, ruling president in that moment in general television, and he committed suicide during the weekend. And we tried to use with these fellows voice to text in 2016, and the technology was not ready. So we listened to the 40,000 audios and found 7 new audios that the general prosecutor haven't found. And we also work in a project with elections documents. When you vote in Argentina, at the end of the voting table where you are assigned because of your family name, citizens have to complete like this form with information. And look at this woman, this is my mother. She has been a volunteer for all our projects. My daughter too has to do, and we have invited like general audience. And she has to do with the AI project that I'm going to tell you. So with the help of people, not AI, we discover insights, problems that the electoral forms had, like maybe they didn't have the signature of a president of the voting place, or there were some provinces that were the worst, and we could revise 16,000 documents, only 16,000 documents, and we published, no, because the general elections were coming, and we wanted to report on this, and like almost 60% of the telegrams, it's called Telegram, had errors. So my journey to this, like we work with satellite imagery. Argentina is big of all this of Europe, and it's very expensive to use satellite imagery because depending of the resolution, you have to pay like $3,000 a photograph. So we did a project with Sentinel, thank you EU satellite, and to detect the solar farms in Argentina. And I was in the Journalism AI Collab also in a project to detect deforestation with satellite imagery, but we couldn't use Argentina's imagery for detecting cattle in national parks or deforestation because it's very expensive. So we use Mexico and Colombia satellite imagery because it was financed by special NGOs around the world. And I was super frustrated because I wanted to work with computer vision in AI, something with Argentina. And then my mother asked me, are we going, like another election came and she asked me, are we going to do the Telegram's collaboration again? And I didn't want to say, I know, Mom, we are not going to do that. But then we were with the Journalism AI Collab and say, why don't we use computer vision instead of satellite imagery with the documents, no? Of why don't we use that solution? Have you ever played Battleship? Do you play Battleship here? So imagine that what we did, it was like a battleship with election forms. So the eye of the algorithm had to detect if there was information or missing in different boxes that we indicated were important for us to get information. Hello, we were investigating like 5 different districts, so we have to adapt for different battles because each province has different forms depending on the lists. And we have problems like scrapping the information. We then, because some provinces has like 2 pages and the PDF didn't come in 2 pages. So this was our battleship, no? We turned the algorithm from red, green, blue to gray to get easier interpretation of the information. We also, not we, but we collaborated with a software company that always charges money to La Nación for services, but for this project they volunteer because they wanted to test technology, and elections transparency is a mission for everyone, no? So 3 minutes. Okay, they analyzed the forms and they gave us these results where the electoral documents, the AI, told that we miss information. So we publish in the Sunday edition. We're a national newspaper from, we started on 1870, so a legacy newsroom. We call audience to help us revise an algorithm finding. We told them, hey, there's an algorithm that said that this Telegram has problem. Help us revise the algorithm. And so we made partnership with transparency NGOs like Poder Ciudadano is Transparency International in Argentina and different universities. We made hackathons online, offline. It was COVID time. And hey, these people discovered things that the algorithm didn't. Like, what happened? Look, some telegrams were scanned upside down. So when the battleship went to A3, there was information because it was upside down. So what we said for the general elections, we tuned the algorithms and said, first you have to look up right if you found a barcode. If you find a barcode, you go to look in these spaces. But if you don't find a barcode up right, you go down left, and then if you found it, you do the algorithm there. And another thing that discovered the humans in the loop analyzing AI was that some telegrams were scanned tilted. So the robotic eye went crazy because they didn't understand what was happening. So what we did for general elections was to reduce the size of the box. So in case it was tilted, it didn't get confused. It wasn't very relevant, the information, like 95% of the information was okay, but it was a message we published that we were looking watchdog, the transparency of election with AI technology and lots of civil society involved. And we were super proud to be highlighted by the Sigma Awards for this project also 2 years ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Florencia. We will, I would suggest we first take the other 2 presentations, and then we open it to the audience that anybody of you can ask questions. So, Pierre, the second one. Pierre is the Chief Technology Officer of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalism, of ICIJ, based in Paris.
Thank you. Can I have the presentation, please? All right. Oh, nope, that's not my presentation. Okay. Open the PDF, maybe. Yes. Sorry. So maybe I can start just saying a few things about ICIJ. No, it's on its way. I can see it's on its way. Yeah. My name is Pierre Romera. I'm French. And I'm the Chief of Technology at ICIJ. ICIJ is an organization that nobody can pronounce. The name is really hard to remember, but you probably heard about our big investigation, like the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers more recently, or even the Uber files. Just to give you some context, because I'm talking about ICIJs in several ways. We are three groups. The first one is the staff, ICIJ, that staff members like me, a small group of people. The other groups are the partners, people that work with us during the investigations. And in the middle, with some overlap, they are the members, which is the initial group that represent ICIJ, which is a group of members that exchange tips, information, and they are a part of the same network of journalists. So I'm going to just skip those few things and go straight to the investigations. So today I'm going to talk about 4 investigations, not especially the most famous one, but they give you a clear idea of what we do with AI. First, I'm going to talk about the implant files, which was an investigation into the medical devices industry. Then I'm going to talk about Mauritius leak, an investigation about tax evasion schemes in Mauritius. Then I'm going to talk about Luanda leaks, an investigation about Isabel dos Santos in Angola. And finally, the Pandora Papers, which was the biggest collaboration in journalism history. So first, the implant files. So when we started to work on the implant files, we didn't have any leak, any information. So our reporters, our partners, made a lot of freedom of information requests in the world, and we managed to get 5.4 adverse event reports, so reports written by doctors about incident with medical devices. The problem with those reports, which were written by hand, was that it was very hard to know how many people died, if they were harmed by the medical devices, because, you know, in the report you had sentences like the patient expired instead of the patient died. So it was very hard to just, you know, collect the occurrences of death in the document. So to solve that problem, we try to use machine learning, which is a subset of AI that was discussed a lot today, to identify in the report the different ways to talk about death. And because of this training of the algorithm, we managed to classify more than 3,000 deaths from those reports that were caused by medical devices. So that was one of our first experience with machine learning. Of course, we did a few other smaller experience before, but this one was really customized for the investigation, and that's showed us the power of working hand-to-hand with a data analyst to extract relevant information from documents. Then we worked on another leak called the Mauritius leak investigation. Basically, we got reports from Mauritius where we could see a lot of tax evasion schemes going through Mauritius. And so we had a problem with those documents. How do you sort out this massive amount of documents? How do you find stories in the documents? And so for the first time, we tried to identify documents by similarities. We did what we called, how do you say that? We tried to find some sort of patterns between those documents. So we asked the journalist to tag each document and say, this is a tax return form, this is a business plan, this is a contract. And then with just a few documents, we train our algorithm to be able to detect and classify document in the whole leak. So that was the first time we really used machine learning to speed up the search into a massive amount of documents. So this is what we call supervised learning. It's a subfield of AI. It's probably the most common use case you will see in news media outlet because the benefit for the journalist is quite obvious. The journalist provide an input, human input, and out of it, the algorithm is about to generate results. So this is why we use it a lot, and it accelerates a lot the process of finding things in the documents. Then we worked on an investigation called the Luanda leaks. Much more documents, leaked documents from Angolan billionaire Isabel dos Santos. But most of those documents were in Portuguese, and our partners are from all around the world. We have people in many countries, and unfortunately they don't speak Portuguese. So one of the first challenge we had with this leak was to translate the document from Portuguese. But as I said, it was leaked documents, so it was tricky to handle. We couldn't send it to Google Translate to do the translation for us. We couldn't use any third party. So we had to find a solution using our own technology. And to do so, we managed to translate the document using offline translation through an open source tool called Apertium. It was not working great, to be honest. It was the first attempt to translate document in mass at the time, but it did the job, and it allowed journalists from everywhere in the world to investigate those documents, even if they were not speaking Portuguese. Again, for this investigation, we tried to classify documents by similarity. So again, we created clusters of documents, such as balance sheet, meeting minutes, contract, etc. And so thanks to machine learning, again, we were able to refine the search and let the user explore the document more quickly. Oh, it's not working anymore. Still not. Well, can someone move to the next slide? No, it's not working. What should I do? Okay. It's okay. Yeah, it works now. Okay, so that's how we presented the data from the Luanda leaks. This is our search engine, the one we use for every leak, every investigation we do. And as you see on the left, we added tags to the document. We call them clusters. That's the technical term in machine learning. And basically, that was a way for the journalist to target very specific types of documents using the tags. Can we move forward, please? Yeah, again, please. Then finally, the Panama Papers. So yeah, the Panama Paper was a challenge. The Paradise after that was a challenge. The Panama Papers was also a huge one. It was as big, even bigger than the Panama Papers, but it came from a lot of offshore providers, so companies that were providing legal services to individuals and companies. And so, well, it was very hard because the data was in many, many formats, plus many different ways to organize it. So we had to create tools for the journalists to be able to identify leads from the documents. Thank you. And so we first try to eliminate the noise from the document. To do so, we use machine learning to identify spams, newsletter, search result, so we could add tags again to the document and let the user exclude those documents from the result. So for instance, if you were looking for Shakira in the documents, you wouldn't get every newsletter mentioning Shakira. You would probably get relevant documents related to her. Wonderful, thank you. Another important part of this project was the structured data. Only 4% of the data was structured, meaning that only 4% was CSV, Excel files, and so it was very hard to build a database with this leak. But the thing is, at ICIJ, we strongly believe that the reason why offshore jurisdiction exists is because there is no transparency in those jurisdictions. So we wanted to extract data from this leak to be able to list, again, the list of, every offshore companies mentioned in the leak. And so to do so, we ask our algorithm using machine learning to extract beneficial owner from the document to build the database that is mentioned on the bottom right corner, Offshore Leaks database. And so thanks to machine learning, we managed to extract structured data from documents that were not structured. But I mean, I'm not going to talk about the safety nets that we can have when dealing with AI, but one of the solutions we had at ICIJ is to fact check everything, every single row, including when we publish a data set of 100,000 rows. And so to do so, we created a platform that is modelizing our data fact-checking effort. It's called Prophecies. It's open source as everything we produce. And basically on that platform, our data editor is able to give to several journalists a sample of documents or a sample of rows they have to check, and then they verify that the work performed by the computer is correct. So it's a very long process, so that's why we try to industrialize it. So finally, I wanted to say that everything we do is, of course, tailored for the investigations, but we try to build generic solutions that are available to all. Our search engine DataShare is available online. It's open source. You can download it on your computer and mine your own document with it. It's using computer vision to do OCR and extract text from images. And it also provides you with a group of pipelines to extract named entities, so name of people, organization, and locations. So you can search into your document in minutes. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Pierre, thanks a lot. Now, in the end, Daniel Houden from Lighthouse reports from the Netherlands.
Let's see if this is going to work. Is the microphone working? Yeah. Can we bring up the... Someone's waving from the back of the room. No problem. Sorry? There we go. Let's move on. So I'll start off by saying a few things about Lighthouse. Lighthouse Reports is a non-profit investigative newsroom. What's distinct, perhaps, about us is that we're not ourselves a platform. So we work exclusively through collaborations with other media. There are several people in this room who've worked with Lighthouse in the past. As a group, we are basically an interdisciplinary investigations team. So we have traditional investigative reporters, we have data scientists, we have open source investigators, and money trails journalists. As often as possible, working together and trying to experiment with the different approaches that those skills can bring together. We've worked with about just over 100 different outlets from around the world. And we function basically on a couple of levels. We're a collaborations lab in some senses, because we put together skills which don't often come together inside investigations, and certainly not to be put at the disposal of traditional newsrooms. So we're looking to try and innovate new approaches. And then we're quite explicit about the fact that we're very impact focused. We map the potential outcomes of our investigations, and part of the reason that we'll choose to launch investigations will be to do with where we see potential impact from that journalism. Quick selection of media partners. Here are an unknown number of familiar logos and mastheads. So I think it's useful to mention how we think about AI in the newsroom, because it's going to be a little bit distinct, I think, from the two previous talks that you've heard. Up on the left-hand side, we have the standard definition from the which is popularized by LSE's Journalism AI. And down here on the right, we have the shorthand for how we most often think about how to use AI. So basically, we're looking at often quite small use cases, certainly very small, tiny in comparison to ICIJ, where we can use AI in order to speed things up so that we can spend time on the things that we want to do with an investigation. Now, for full disclosure and a little promotion for what's happening at 3:30, is that we spend more time actually interrogating AI than utilizing it. So our biggest investigations to date in and around AI are actually algorithmic accountability reporting. We'll be talking about how to approach algorithmic accountability reporting with one of my colleagues in a masterclass at 3:30 this afternoon. But I will talk a little bit, and quite in brief, to give some time for questions as well for the rest of the panel, about how we used it in a couple of instances. In comparison to what's gone beyond before, these are going to be quite small use cases, but hopefully some of the practicality and utility will shine through and might actually be examples that are very relevant to how you approach investigations, especially if you're using open source in what you're doing. So there's a couple of investigations I'm going to talk about. One was looking inside a secret WhatsApp group. So this was a leak of confidential communications which came to us. And we'll start there. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about quite a simple process, which is very useful for some of the investigations that we do that use visual reconstruction techniques and 3D modeling. So compared to the 11.2 million documents that were referenced earlier on, 60 screenshots sounds quite manageable, but I'll talk about what happened in this instance. So we have done quite a lot of reporting as Lighthouse and with partners on illegal pushbacks by governments around Southeastern Europe and Western Balkans, and we had a particularly big and quite hard-hitting investigation where the centerpiece was evidence of the role of Croatian police in violent assaults on asylum seekers trying to cross over from Bosnia. When that investigation came out, the Croatian authorities were very quick to isolate the specific instance where we had very powerful footage of masked men clubbing and beating asylum seekers. And they denied that this was at any level a systemic issue. They said it was just a few bad apples. They suspended a few policemen and tried to kind of move along. So a whistleblower came to us with screenshots from a group of Croatian officials. So the starting point is the screenshots. Now those screenshots, we used a couple of different proprietary tools to help us find the individuals behind the numbers that were visible in those screenshots. and they led back to the head of the Croatian Border Police, the head of public relations at the Ministry of Interior, and it became clear that people at a very senior level in Croatia were very well aware of the pushbacks operations, that they were coordinating them, and this was all happening under Operation Corridor. The WhatsApp group itself was named Corridor. So we had to, first thing that we needed to do, because we were working with media who don't speak necessarily Croatian, we had German media who were on board, we had Swiss media and UK media as well. We needed to transcribe those screenshots, so we were able to use, we didn't face the same security concerns that you would have done with the Luanda leaks. We were able to use image analysis to get text from image. It's just a quick example. It wasn't a major task, but it turned 1 or 2 days' labor into about an hour's work. And then we could have a Croatian speaker go through the automated translation and check it and point out any errors that had come up. Now, something I think that might be familiar for lots of people who were working in teams with people from different specialisms is that mistakes get made in the way that data is structured, and then you have to tidy it up. So very simple mistake in this instance, but for me it speaks to some of the possibilities that are coming with different AI tools now. So inside this group, there was discussion about specific locations, villages, individuals, numbers of people. There were photographs of people who'd been beaten or herded up, people lying on the floor in the forest, etc. So we had someone go through and identify all of the villages that were mentioned, and then log the coordinates for those villages, and we want to then map that out. But unfortunately, the longitude and latitude were put into the same row. We had someone who was doing that who was not an expert in using Google Sheets. But rather than have to go and get someone else from the team to do a command for them or shuffle this work along, just use ChatGTP to write out a Google command in order to separate that. And then quickly we were able to move that over to a GeoJSON file, and that meant that we could use an open source mapping tool to then map out both the size of the incident in terms of the number of people involved, and also the locations, which then enabled us to map this and begin the storytelling phase. So a series of very quick, simple, small things which removed a lot of labor from the process and meant that a team with mixed skills could move quickly. Now, the Melilla massacre reconstruction, some of you may be aware, this refers to a major loss of life that happened in the Spanish exclave of Melilla in North Africa in June of last year. We were taking a mass of open source user-generated content and some footage that was shot that day from the Spanish side and from the Moroccan side, and building a visual reconstruction of the border post where we think at least 70 people died that day. Now, we use and have begun to use 3D modeling quite extensively in investigations we're doing, where being able to have a visual model helps you to locate what would otherwise be fragmented pieces of the visual puzzle of what happened that day. And now one of the kind of the boring backroom tasks that you do in these investigations often is texturing, which is it's a tedious part of the 3D pipeline, but when you're trying to do work like this with small teams, anything you can do to speed it up helps enormously. And for people who haven't used textures before, what you're looking at doing is basically projecting a texture onto a blank onto an otherwise blank shape. So the simplest example to explain it is that you have a sphere, and you can use one of these plugins just to skin that sphere as a basketball, for instance. I mean, in our case, it was slightly more gruesome than that, but you get the basic idea. I'm moving a little more quickly now because conscious of time for questions for the others as well. A couple of current use cases which we're finding quite useful. Very often we're doing social media sourcing in order to try and identify potential sources of visual or audio evidence that's out there across Facebook, across TikTok, etc. And we'll be working with our team. We have a multilingual team, but they don't speak all languages under all circumstances. Or one thing that we found is particularly useful is that we're able sometimes to explain what we're looking for in to a chatbot from one of the large language models, and by explaining the basics of what we're looking for, it will then suggest different search terms that we can potentially use. So in this instance, for instance, we were able to describe what we were looking for, explain how we'd found it in other circumstances, and then send it off to find search terms that we could use to search social media for images of Iranians who are being very badly treated at the border into Turkey. And it turned out to be remarkably effective. Second quick example, you can see two images there. This comes from an investigation that we did into phosphate exports, which were finding their way out of Syria and into Europe, making money for the Assad regime and bypassing sanctions en route. We had a key piece of evidence, and you may not be able to see on the screen, but on the photograph on your left, it wasn't originally possible to make out that ship's name, which then helped us to track the movements of some of these shippings. So we used a sharpening tool, which some of you may know, called Topaz Labs. So I'm just going to quickly note something else that's come up for us and is an issue. The illustration that you see there comes from a Wired series, a series that we did with Wired magazine and with Verspeton, investigating fraud detection algorithms. That's an original illustration that was commissioned from an artist called Catherine Lamb. We've recently signed up to a petition from the Center for Artistic Inquiry, which is calling on media to not to use generative AI in order to produce illustrations and thereby replace the profession of illustrators. And just in wrapping up this, I wanted to take note of that. We do need to think about the ethics of where we do and we don't use AI. So that's part of our open discussion. I guess like a lot of organizations, we're distributed, so our team talk to each other on Slack. And in the AI channel that we have on our internal Slack at Lighthouse, I would say about 30 to 40% of the discussion is actually about the ethics of the use of some of these tools. I doubt that's unique to our own organization, but it certainly needs to be part of the conversation. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Daniel. I would like to open the discussion to the audience, so whoever might have a question, please ask. Okay. May you introduce yourself with a few words?
Hi, I'm Friedrich Moos. I'm a documentary filmmaker, currently actually portraying some of the work of the ICIJ in an upcoming documentary film, and also the use of AI tools to fight disinformation. My question is, how expensive are the tools that you are using? Would this be something that small newsrooms could use? Is this something that like small individual bloggers could use as well, who are doing this investigative work? Thank you.
I think we start with Pierre, who is responsible for the biggest
yeah, thanks for the question. That's a big concern for us because the cost of those tools is huge, and it's a big concern for us because we think that AI might be only in the hand of big actors if we continue to use it the way we use it right now. To give you an example, for the Pandora Papers, it cost us close to $30,000 to put everything in the system, including computer vision, which is the most costly resources. But everything I showed to you, DataShare, for instance, it's open source and you can run it on your computer. So even if some of those tools are very expensive, I think we should aim at creating something that is still working for much smaller investigation, because everything is not like the Panama or Panama Papers. We also wanted to create something that is accessible even if you are not a tech-savvy person. So yeah, I encourage you to check our tools.
Daniel or Florencia, you want to add something?
Yes, like while we learn how to use these technologies, it costs also time of your staff learning, but we really rely on collaboration. For the Telegrams project, we made a collaboration that didn't cost anything, and they wanted to test the image recognition tool. And for the satellite imagery of the solar farms, we also made a collaboration with a startup, and they provided the Google Cloud, the fine-tuning of the algorithm. So I think that it's important that you think in collaboration and bring projects that really want them to participate and be part of the national conversation with their trademark, maybe?
Daniel?
To some extent, the answer to the question depends on the sensitivity of the data that you're going to handle. I think Pierre indicated before why it's not always possible to use cloud tools. This is also a concern for us. There's a lot of automations which are coming up now, which would be great to use and would save us time internally, but we can't use them because we don't know what's going to happen to that data. So there is this balance between what's open source and what's available, especially now in a moment of kind of extreme experimentation. There's a lot of things which are free to use, but they come with a lot of concerns about what happens with that data. And then there are, I won't go into specifics, but there are a lot of tools which we could potentially use which are incredibly expensive, which are available to, I mean, I'm thinking of proprietary tools which track ships and actually look for patterns related to their movement, which could suggest smuggling activity. It could suggest all sorts of potential illegal or interesting things, and with small tweaks to their algorithms, you could potentially look for patterns which would be very relevant to all sorts of supply chain journalism as well. So there are enormous numbers of tools out there at the moment. Some of them are clearly not aimed at journalism because they're very expensive. But I think non-profits can often negotiate cheaper access to these tools, and then I would encourage people to get in touch with us at Lighthouse in case there's tools that we have access to that we could place at the disposal of outlets and small newsrooms who want to do this. I would just say that we partner with metro newsrooms, non-profits, so in the wide investigation I mentioned, the other partner was a small newsroom, a tiny newsroom in Rotterdam with a handful of journalists. So collaborations are the way around some of these cost issues.
From my experience, I would say the more it is important to protect sources or to protect the information, the more expensive it is, because you can't work with cloud solutions, and so it has to be on your own server, and this is a problem in many cases. Next question. Yeah, okay.
Daniel, I wanted to play devil's advocate on the note on which you ended about on the question of artwork. I share your concerns, as do many people. It would be a horrible world where machines generate the art that we see and not human beings. However, I'm just trying to understand where these concerns come from, because many of the methods or uses of AI that have been described by the panel could equally have been done by humans who would have been paid a salary to do that, right? You know, scraping those documents, looking at, translation, and et cetera, right? So why are we placing a higher value on the non-use of artwork as opposed to the non-use of translators or data processors, etc.? I mean, and once again, I'm with you, but I just want to understand better the source of our concerns.
Daniel.
I think it's a good question. It's a fair question, and I'd be interested to hear what the rest of the panel think as well. So we are placing a premium on creativity in this instance. The tools that are the generative models that are producing illustrations, AI illustrations, are trained on the work of existing artists. So what you are seeing are simulacra of countless artists' work, basically reconstructed, interpreted by an algorithm. So in this case, we are saying that when you are replacing different forms of manual labor, or you're trying to automate tasks with very large data sets, I don't think it's realistic to compare that to this single category. I don't think that you should have. I think that the questions that are raised by taking a stance on an issue like that aren't simple, and the lines aren't very easy to draw. But I think it's useful to say that there are some use cases where you can take a stand, because it then begins this kind of conversation. I think a lot of the current round of AI accountability reporting is going to be looking into how data was collected in order to train AI, and who has been, who stands to profit and who stands to lose under these circumstances. But accelerating forward, if you don't take a stand over AI illustration at this point, then you will essentially have an ever reducing kind of original flow of ideas and human creation into this. So I think in the longer term it becomes incredibly reductive, as well as the jobs lost for illustrators themselves. So it's an area where there are no absolutely clean answers, but I think this is one use case where it's worth taking a position.
You want to add something, or?
I think that if I have understood your question properly, is that it helps for the impossible projects, the ones that you couldn't do. You couldn't hire translators to pay 1 million documents translation bill, or journalists classifying 1 million documents. You will say, okay, within the news cycle or a long year investigation, you just surrender. We're not going to do this project. And here is when I think that AI is a good solution, because if not, you wouldn't hire these people. You wouldn't make the project. No, I think that is where, if I understood your question, I think it's an ethic use of AI, despite the work of translators or data entry people.
Yeah.
And well, I agree with Florencia. It's really for us a matter of achieving impossible tasks. When we did the Paradise paper, we estimated that it would take 80 years to read everything, in which case, it's not possible. I really think that it's a broader debate about the value of labor, and in the case of art, I think the question is not about should we industrialize the generation of art. Here it's more about how do you pay people that work on something. For investigation like our big investigation, you won't pay anyone to read documents for 80 years. So that's why we don't really talk about it.
25 minutes ago, the General Assembly of IPI should have started in this room. So we have to come to an end. Thanks a lot for your questions. Thanks a lot for your presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.